Blessings, everyone. This is Reverend Afrin with the Four Pillars Proto Temple. Today, I would like to talk in our video about the challenges of a spiritual practice and what the goal or, the purpose of a spiritual practice should be or could be, potentially. So, Wicca in many ways is a mystery faith. It's a faith that does require some form of initiation or some form of specialized training. It's not a faith for everyone. It's not a faith for all of your needs. It does suit certain types of people better than others, but certainly it does also allow for room for personal and spiritual growth, but it does require a lot of one-on-one practice and development as well. Now, in modern Wicca, there aren't many traditions that require you to be initiated as part of the process of learning. So in a lot of ways, in modern Wicca, especially in the West, you are able to learn on your own, learn things online, and that doesn't keep you from learning by not being initiated. So in other forms of mystical societies, magical lodges, mystical societies, certain other religious mysteries, you have got to be initiated in order to do them. And, for instance, the one that I think of the most is the Buddhist Tantra Yoga, Tantrayana, or Vajrayana sometimes as well. Either one of those, oftentimes does require what they call an empowerment, which is essentially initiation. And so they say you can't learn about these things unless you've been empowered. You can't practice or perform these things unless you've been empowered. And so you find in a lot of ways, especially in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, that a lot of people just aren't you're not accessible to that information. So there's a lot of different preliminary practices that need to take place before you can actually go on to actually learn about the real meat of what it is you're learning about. In many cases, even you can't even purchase the necessary texts. I do have a couple higher level Buddhist texts. One of them is actually a Vajrasattva practice, which is a higher level practice. Frankly, I'm surprised I was even allowed to purchase the text because in a lot of ways you have to be empowered to be able to perform a lot of these. There are many other practices as well, and the reason for that is very simple. The reason is because not every practice is available for every person, and so going back to speaking generally about mystical and magical practices, it's not available for every person. Not every person is at the right level in their development. Not every person is at the right level in their lives or in their spiritual or mental capacity to be able to undertake these practices. And because of that, you should not be permitted to even undertake the practices. Now, of course, as I said, in things like Tibetan Buddhism, they go a step further and say you can't even learn about the practices. Now, I think that, in some ways mirrors what you may have been able to find in early Wicca back in the 1950s and 60s, and even up until the 80s, when you were finding a lot of these covens would only initiate you and would only train you if you were initiated. So you weren't able to really learn much about anything until you've actually been initiated, which is kind of like, from one hand to the other, it's hard to really get to that point. How do you even know if you're going to like it or this is something you want to be serious about if you can't even do this study on your own? So we are fortunate, at least in the West, in America today, to be able to research without having to make any sort of commitments in that way. But even still, a lot of mystical traditions require that you have some sort of a teacher, a guru, a lama, a master, some sort of a mentor, some sort of a teacher that's there to guide you through your spiritual practice. And so a lot of traditions find that to be very, very important. Personally, for me, when I first started Wicca, I began becoming interested in starting to study it exclusively back in 2002. So it's been, several years. Now, even in the 2000s, you might say, well, that wasn't that long ago. No, it wasn't. I mean, that was about 16 years ago at the time of this video. And 16 years ago is kind of a long time when you think about it, especially with the advent and the growth of social media and other internet platforms that has really been able to give people, marginalized groups, if I can say that, or people of alternative faiths, which I don't like that term, but people platforms to be able to share their knowledge and share their wisdom and their joy, in their growth, which is really exciting. And so just in the last 10 years, I would say, Wicca has really blossomed in many different ways and has found footing in many different groups and in many different paths of study because of the internet and in the way that the internet has really helped to develop and grow a lot of this stuff. Now, the Correllian tradition has been very specific and very poignant about their opinions on the internet, and they think that the internet is a great vehicle for helping people to disseminate pagan knowledge and wisdom. And so the Correllian tradition uses the internet and social media in a lot of ways to really help to grow our faith, which I think is really cool. Providing that you can get, good quality information, which of course you can. And I think that a lot of the material found in the Correllian tradition is very, very good, and it's very philosophical, which I personally like. Now, other people might not be very philosophical, that's fine, but for me personally, I find it to be very, very interesting and keeps me intellectually as well as spiritually inspired and cultivated, which is very cool. But even in my practice, when I first started, again, back in 2002, I had a very difficult time getting my footing in a lot of ways. And I think if I wouldn't have had such resolve, I wouldn't have kept up with my practices. And I think that's probably true for a lot of people. And a lot of the reasons is because, of course, I couldn't find any help. I couldn't find anyone to assist me and to teach me and to train me and to guide me in my spiritual practice. And back then, even as as early as 2002, you weren't you didn't have access to a lot of the material online that we do today. And the Correllian tradition, to my knowledge, became public in 2001, if memory serves me. And of course, they didn't have such a big presence, and so I didn't actually find the Correllian tradition until 2009. So, that's always something to keep in mind. When I first started, I did actually have two mentors that helped to get me interested, inspire me, and to help me, grow and develop. Unfortunately, neither of them are actually members of the faith any longer, and so I kind of went on and did my own thing after having been with them and kind of spent a lot of my time being a solitary. And so it's really hard for a lot of people, I think, to really have that sense of a community and structure in their faith, especially in the Wiccan faith. We tend so often to be solitary, even though, of course, traditionally, the faith was meant to be a group faith where you practice in small covens. But now, especially in America, you find often a lot of people just prefer to be solitary. And there are even people who are in covens but practice primarily solitary, or have been in covens at one point and decided it's not for me, I prefer to be solitary. And so they go ahead and they do that practice by themselves anyway. And so it's really difficult, and that's one thing that I really do like about the Correllian tradition, is that through the medium of social media, I've been really able to stay in touch with members of the tradition and get to know them. And I feel, and some of them I haven't met, and I feel like when we do finally meet, it's going to be almost like a reunion as opposed to meeting for the first time, because I feel like we will have known each other enough that it's almost like we're meeting together and we're all part of a spiritual family. And so it makes it very much like a family reunion more than meeting for the first time, which I think is very cool. And being able to use social media in that way, I think is using it for the best purpose, to stay in touch with people in our faith and be able to reconnect with everyone. Now, of course, the one other thing that I really like about the Correllian tradition is that, as currently, as of this video, I am a second degree priest. I'm currently working on my third degree to be a high priest. And the Correllian tradition does have a system of training. It's called the Correllian Educational Ministries, where it's basically a seminary, where they pair each student up with a mentor, and the mentor helps to guide the student. And I think in that way it has been incredibly instrumental in my development and my growth, because often you find that, again, early on in my faith, in my practice, I didn't have any teachers, and I almost gave up on many occasions. And even several years ago, wanting to say, well, is it really worth it? It's a really, really long road to hoe. Is it really something that I want to continue to do? And having those people there as guides, I think, is really important. So having a spiritual guide, a spiritual mentor, is something that's going to keep people engaged, inspired, and lead them on to being able to complete their training or be able to complete their study or whatever it is they're looking to do. So I think that it's really important that we have mentors and we have leaders that can do that for people, because that's the only way that our organization, as our faith, is going to continue to grow and develop, is by having those leaders, which is really important. And I think that's one of the major challenges, as spiritual challenges as Wiccans, and something that new Wiccans will face. Now, when I first started, again, I didn't have a teacher, I didn't have a mentor, and the two mentors I did have for that brief period of time at the beginning were not part of any tradition or part of any other covenant, so we were kind of just doing our own thing amateurly, and it really had nothing to do with any particular tradition or anything like that, so it wasn't like it was sanctioned officially in a way. But, for me, having that there anyway was still important. And of course there wasn't any groups around my area that I could get involved in anyway. And some groups would say, well, because you didn't have a teacher, that doesn't legitimize your practice and your right as being able to call yourself a Wiccan. And then of course there are a lot of newer contemporary Wiccan organizations that say it's completely possible to self-initiate and to be a Wiccan on your own terms as opposed to being on somebody else's terms. And that's important as well. But at the end of the day, now that I've kind of been through both sides, I've been without a mentor, I've been with a mentor, and I can say that having a mentor, I think, definitely increases the success rate of students and increases their ability to grow, develop, and study in the best way that they can. So although it's not required, and no one's going to tell you, well, you're not a real person because you didn't, have a mentor or whatever, that's beside the point, because that's not legitimate anyway. But I've found that if you are able to get yourself under the tutelage of a tutor or a mentor, then go for it, because that's really important, and that's really what's going to help you to continue on your path, and you're not going to peter out and just fall off the wagon. So what exactly is the purpose of being a Wiccan? What's the point of it? What's the purpose of being a Wiccan practitioner or following the Wiccan faith? And I call it a practice as opposed to a belief, in a similar way that, in Buddhism they refer to it as a Buddhist practice, because it's something that you have to continually do. It's something, that you have to do over and over and over and continuously. And it's something that you can't give up on. And it's hard work. It takes a lot of effort to do it. It takes a lot of effort to study, and it's a part of a practice. It's a whole thing. And it's not just like, okay, well, now I've been initiated, or now I've dedicated myself to the path, the craft, and so now I'm a Wiccan, and that's all that I have to do. I'm all done. And I mean, for some people, that might suffice for them. For some people, I've been initiated, I can now call myself a Wiccan, and if that's all that you want out of this whole thing, then that's cool. That's all you need then. But most often, at least especially in my life and in my practice and what I've seen, is that that's not enough to sustain you on a day-to-day basis. You're not going to be able to just you take that and allow that to sustain you, you're eventually going to fall off the wagon. You're eventually going to leave the faith. You're eventually going to go and do all kinds of other things and study and find fulfillment elsewhere. So it's important that you continue to study and continue to grow and continue to develop and continue to find like-minded individuals that are going to help you to stay on the right path and to bolster and strengthen your faith. And that's true of anything, really. That's true of absolutely anything. But, just being initiated isn't really enough to keep that interest going. And so that is one of the challenges of the faith. Having a teacher, having a group, finding a place where you can feel like you belong, finding a safe place where you can study and experiment and grow. But also you need to be able to learn and develop yourself and your skill. But at the end of the day, what's the point of it? What does it matter? Why am I doing all of this? What is the point? In Christianity, they would say the purpose of being a Christian is to follow the teachings of Jesus, to find salvation and be entered and give entrance into heaven. In Judaism, they would say, well, it's to honor God and it's to live a godly life by following the rules that God has set forward for us and living the best life that we can by following and honoring and worshiping and giving praise to God. In Islam, they would say, well, the purpose of our faith is to find peace through the surrender to God and the will of God, and then find peace in God. Islam meaning peace, and live our lives in the best way that we can by following the rules of God, as well as finding peace with our relationship with God. As well, Buddhism, the purpose of Buddhism is to reach nirvana or enlightenment. The purpose of Hinduism is to find moksha or liberation from the endless cycles of life, death, and rebirth. But in Wicca, what exactly is our purpose? What are we doing here? Why are we, living our lives this way? And why are we choosing to be Wiccan as opposed to something else? The answer to that question kind of gets into a little bit of theology, philosophy, whatever you'd like to say. But the purpose of our practice to be Wiccans, what exactly is the purpose? There are a lot of people that come to Wicca originally because of the interest in magic. And so, of course, learning about magic, learning about the different ways of magic, learning about ceremonial magic and folk magic or high and low magic, learning about these different things, how you can use them, how they work with you, learning about invocations, learning about correspondences and, using stones and herbs and colors and flowers and plants and all sorts of different things. That in itself is a very daunting task that takes many people years and years and years and years to learn. And even then, they finally specialize in something. So you could say that's part of the spiritual practice because magic is part of Wicca. A lot of people might be more spiritual and religious than magical, and other people might be the opposite. I, on the other hand, of course, as being a priest and being someone who is trying to practice it more on a spiritual level, it is obviously something that's more spiritual to me, and I practice magic very little. Not that I can't, it's just something that I just don't often do because I find my relationship with the gods to be my first priority. Now, obviously, if there are some people that are interested more in magic and might not so much be interested in the religious side, and some of them might not understand that when they say Wicca is not exclusively magic, and so if they say, well, I'm Wiccan, but I only practice magic and I really don't believe in the gods, that's not exactly Wicca per se. But, having to learn all of this stuff is obviously another challenge that comes along with our practice. And that's why we say it's not for everyone, because not everybody can learn these things. Not everybody has the time or energy or the ability to learn everything that they need to do or to specialize in a particular thing, be it divination or magical arts or a ritual craft or something like that. There are so many different things that, someone can do. And each one of those in and of itself has its own challenges and pitfalls. And that's why it's important to have a mentor, because these mentors will guide you not only in your studies and not only to give suggestions or guidance in terms of what you should learn or how you should learn, but also to let you know, hey, I've been there. I've been on the verge of quitting. I've been on the verge of selling off all of my ritual items and just giving up on everything. I've been to the point where I've been so deeply in touch with the divine, and I know how to get there again. I've been to, astral planes or astral temples, or I've been in situations where I have to do ritualized healing or purification, all of these different things that your mentors have been and have done, and then they're allowing you to access their knowledge and their pitfalls and their lessons. And so that's the most important thing I think about Wicca, is that although we have a lot of research and a lot of material that you can study, having that one-on-one connection with your mentor and them teaching you their way, telling you their problems, telling you their pitfalls, telling you their mistakes and their misgivings, that is where you really grow and develop. And that transmission from teacher or mentor to student is really what it's all about. And so it's really important to have that. Not saying that you can't get to the same result without one, but it definitely makes things much, much, much easier. And as another example, in my proto-temple right now, we have a couple of members who have been practicing Wicca on and off for years, and they never really got it off the ground because they never really had a group, or they never really had a mentor, or they never really knew where to start. And they have great knowledge and great life experiences that they're bringing, but being able to have that connection again and learn from other people is what really makes it helpful. But getting back to the topic of what's the purpose, the Correllian tradition says that the whole purpose of being a Wiccan is to build a deep relationship with the divine, and through life experiences, good, bad, magical, non-magical, otherwise, through any life experiences, we are gaining valuable experience, memories, and life lessons, which we carry with us in our spirit. So when we are continually being reincarnated, these lessons are continually being gathered until eventually we have reached, in a way you could say purification, you could say deification. We have reached a point of pure spiritual enlightenment, to say the word, although enlightenment is more of a mental and spiritual frame of mind. It's not so much a frame of being, because in Buddhism they believe that enlightenment has always been there. It's always been a part of you. It's always been there. The whole purpose of Buddhism and the whole purpose of meditation is to open yourself up and realize what's already there, that you are an enlightened being, and you're just throwing off the chains there, and opening yourself up and realizing that you are an enlightened being. Now, Wicca, on the other hand, is about developing yourself to be a purely spiritual being, because a lot of people, like for instance in Christianity, just another example, feels that our real home is heaven. It's the place where God is. So being here is kind of like, it's whatever, because our real home, where we're really trying to go, is heaven, because that's where we really want to be. That's our real home. And Wicca doesn't believe that necessarily. Wicca believes that our life here is just as valuable as our life there, and that when we finally reach our fully self-actualized self, and we have developed our spiritual abilities and our spiritual lives and our spirit itself to make it pure, as it were, through many lifetimes of lessons, of failures, of mistakes, of growth and achievement, we can eventually reunite with the divine as a fully realized divine being, almost like an ancestral spirit, a spirit that has been, perfected through multiple lifetimes and can now return to the divine. So that is really the purpose of our practice and our Wiccan faith, is to do that. Now, it makes me think a lot about, again, going back to the reference of Tibetan Buddhism, because in Tibetan Buddhism, what they do is they do all these different spiritual practices, chanting, meditation, prayer, all these different spiritual, visualizations, a lot of the similar things that you might find in a lot of Wiccan practices. And in Tibetan Buddhism, they say, well, a lot of these high-level lamas, a lot of these high-level spiritual leaders have these spiritual powers. They can make things happen. They can make miracles happen. They can do magic. And of course, you have to understand that Tibetan Buddhism has a lot of shamanic undertones, because Tibetan Buddhism has kind of been added on top of the shamanic religion that was in Tibet, which is called the Burn religion. So that religion there was very shamanic. So you find a lot of those elements in Tibetan Buddhism as well. So understand that, these lamas, if you can think of it as a way as like shamans, kind of to parallel, not that they are, but just to parallel, having these spiritual abilities. And in Tibetan Buddhism, they say, well, that's all great and good. The High Lama, you go to him, he heals you, everything's great. Or you go to the High Lama and he gives you a blessing and then everything's perfect and everything's all happy, hunky-dory. That's great. But the real purpose of Tibetan Buddhist practice is not to get these magical powers. They kind of just come along with it. But the real purpose is, again, to reach enlightenment, just like every other form of Buddhism. And so I guess in some ways you can kind of parallel that a little bit with Wicca. You learn the magic, you have all these things, and which is really great and fascinating and wonderful. But at the same time, learning how magic works, learning how the spiritual universe works, is beneficial to us because it helps us to grow and develop our spirit, which we can then, again, grow and develop until eventually we become among the honored dead and become a god ourselves through many lifetimes of growth and, again, failures, mistakes, whatever. So I guess in some ways I kind of parallel the two a little bit. It seems very similar to me in my opinion, the purpose of that. But the purpose of life as well, is to live in harmony with nature and to live in harmony with ourselves and our family, and to find ways to honor the divine in the world, the divine in ourselves, and to become one with our divine nature as well, and to realize our divine nature, and to realize how we can use our faith and our practices, magic or otherwise, to better our world, our universe, our environment, our communities. That's really the most important thing about it. So a lot of people get hung up on magic. A lot of people get hung up on the relationship to the gods. Well, I don't know who I should choose as my patron. I don't feel a connection to the god and goddess. I don't know how to perform a ritual. I can't do magic. All of these different things that teachers can help you with. But these are part of the path. These are part of the path. You find, again, because of my interest and my knowledge in other faiths, you find in a lot of other faiths these prescribed sort of paths. I reference at this point Islamic mysticism. It's called Sufism. And in Sufism, they have what they call the tariq. Tariq is the path. That's the path that you walk. The path. So the path that you walk is the path that's going to lead you eventually to this sort of rapture experience where your spirit has become so developed through these practices that you can become so closely related with God that you become God. essentially. You lose yourself, you lose your ego, you lose yourself in God. It's called annihilation. They call it annihilation. You annihilate yourself by, not physically like, but you annihilate yourself in God. So you become God. You become so close that you lose yourself in God, to put it as simple as possible. And so that is the path of the Sufi. Now, the path of the Sufi is broken up into different stages and stations as you go further down. And so there's like a Sufi master that will, teach you and guide you along the path. Again, the path. And as they guide you, there are kind of goal points or milestones that you meet every so often along the way. And then each one of those kind of has their own lesson, their own thing you have to be able to accomplish before you can move on to the next one. And then, of course, you often find, in very similar with, again, Tibetan Buddhism, you find that these Sufi masters, through these practices, have developed in a lot of ways these supernatural powers. Again, being able to perform miracles, being able to heal people, being able to do all these different things. And, it's very much a part of many different cultures. This idea of the mystic who goes through and does all these spiritual things, giving them these magical powers. And I guess in some ways you could say that witchcraft is doing a similar thing through meditation and prayer and chanting and visualization, and all of these things that we do to develop our spiritual senses is allowing us very similarly to be able to do what other people, in other faiths are doing. But it takes a lot of work. And although Wicca doesn't have a prescribed path like you might find in Tibetan Buddhism or you might find in Sufism, there's still a sort of mentality, I think, of that path. You still have to be able to follow that path and still be able to have a guide that teaches you and helps you get through these, because everyone goes through the same things. Am I rambling at this point? Maybe I'm just rambling. But everyone goes through the same things around the same time. You go so far, you go through the honeymoon period, it's all exciting and fun, and you want to go and buy everything and be witchy and secretive and magical. And then you get to a point where you're like, is this really for me? I'm falling out of it. It's not as exciting as it used to be. Honeymoon period's over, and then it's like, I'm giving up. And 9 times out of 10, a lot of people do at that point give up, and they decide not to continue. And then, of course, if you were to have a teacher, they would help you to overcome that. That's milestone number 1. And then, of course, you get into other milestones, and you get into other positives and negatives, and, the time when you're able to completely perform a ritual, and the time you're able to fully feel the divine, and the time that you have second thoughts and you want to give up, and then, all these different things. There's milestones, and everybody goes through them. And so that's why it's really important that you have a guide to help you through these pitfalls, as well as through the accomplishments that you can get. So, I hope that, this rambling video has given some people a little bit of hope, has given some people a little bit of guidance, has given some people a little bit of joy and a reassurance and confidence as well, that your practice is your own. Your practice is something that you have to discover and learn on your own. Having a teacher will help you to overcome these obstacles, because 9 times out of 10, the teacher has been through them already, or has been through them already and has helped other people through them and can help you in many ways. So, understand that, and understand that you don't necessarily have to give up, that there's so many different things that you can do to help, cultivate and overcome these objections and obstacles. And don't give up, but realize that by, going through with it, going through on the path you're going to come out of it as a stronger, more spiritual person. You're going to come out of it as a more developed spiritually person, and you're going to be better for it in successive lives as you are reincarnated again and again, to be able to get continued spiritual development and lessons. So I hope this video has been helpful to some of us, and certainly if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to post them on the bottom there in the comment section. And until next time, signing off for now.